Okay, this week is very exciting because we are starting St. Augustine. And I think last week, we ended up talking about Cicero and Plato more than I had planned. And at first I was a little bit, not disappointed, but I was a little bit like, oh man, I wish we got into the Church Fathers, which would have been nice. But in retrospect, as I was studying up on Augustine a little more, talking about Cicero and Plato, I think, were very important to help us understand where Augustine is coming from. He is known as the father of the just war theory, if that gives you an idea of sort of his place in the just war theory or doctrine. And the beauty of Augustine's just war criteria is that he brings Cicero and Christianity together. He essentially fuses Cicero's doctrine of just war with Christian theology. So that what we talked about last week, I think, is really probably we did the absolute best thing that we could do, and I think it was very interesting. I enjoyed our discussion last week. So that's a little bit about St. Augustine and why I like him so much. I took a class on it this past summer. But a couple of things we need to hit on, I think, before we jump straight into Augustine. Some things happened historically between Cicero and St. Augustine. The early church fathers did their just war theory, which I think we talked about a little bit. It was a little more of whether or not Christians should serve in the military at all. And the general consensus among the early church fathers was no. However, the early church fathers did not condemn warfare, which I think is in my opinion, a common mistake that some historians make when they talk about the early church fathers. They tend to just label them pacifists, which when I hear the word pacifist, I think, well, they're opposed to warfare of any kind. That's not the case. But there was certainly some tension and some, I think, working out of how Christians can serve in the Roman Empire. And maybe even for obvious reasons. The Roman Empire was not a friend to the Christians. Caesar was considered to be deity. He was treated as if he were a god. He was sacrificed to by the Roman officers, and so on and so forth. But then we get to Constantine the Great. Okay, can anybody tell me what made him a different Roman emperor than those who came before him?
He eventually converted to Christianity.
He did eventually convert to Christianity.
He embraced it.
What's that?
He embraced Christianity.
He embraced Christianity.
He made it a state religion, an empire religion.
Right. Well, it was made the official state religion after his death, but for all practical purposes, Rome was a Christian empire by virtue of Constantine the Great. And what else? This is totally off the subject of just war, but what we remember, I keep wanting to call him St. Augustine, we remember Constantine the Great every week. We may not realize it, but he assembled a council, the Council of Nicaea, which we say the Nicene Creed here every week as part of our liturgy.
The conspiratorial version is that he actually shaped the beliefs that we hold today.
That is correct.
And
That is exactly right.
gamed it all out for us.
And that he was, that's right, he was very involved in the wording of the Nicene Creed. That is true. And some people say, well, his bishop was actually sort of pushing might not be the word, advising Constantine as to where he needed to throw his weight regarding orthodoxy and making sure that the creed was orthodox. But regardless, that's just a little something else about Constantine. But it gives you an idea about how serious he was about Christianity. It was, and it was a huge, huge turn because the emperor prior to Constantine was, anybody know, Diocletian, who was a terrible persecutor of the church.
Mainly because he thought it weakened the empire.
Yes, and this is in fact something that St. Augustine is constantly addressing as he talks about the just war doctrine. One of the two things that was always in the back of his mind was, number one, the barbarians. The barbarians were knocking on the doors of the Roman Empire at the time of Augustine. In fact, does anybody know how Augustine is said to have died?
During the Vandal siege of his hometown.
Yes, he died. The Vandals were literally tearing down the walls of Hippo. St. Augustine of Hippo, he was the bishop there, tearing down the walls of Hippo it said he died either of exposure or starvation. He was an old man. And another thing that I think is really cool that has nothing to do with just war. Does anybody know what he asked as he was on his deathbed, he was dying? He asked that something be placed all over the walls of the room he was in. Does anybody know what it was? It's really cool. The penitential psalms. So that he could see them when he was lying in his bed, the penitential psalms. It's really cool. But the second thing, which you, and that shaped his just war theory, I mean, because Rome was coming apart at the seams. This was not like the days of Cicero, when Rome was a flourishing empire. So certainly I believe that his just war doctrine was informed in many ways by historically where he fit. Not only with the Christian empire, but with the fact that the Roman army needed soldiers. Now, the second thing is the issue with the Christians. Diocletian did believe that the Christians were causing the decline of the Roman Empire, and a lot of Roman pagan Romans believed that was a common belief in Rome, even after Constantine took the throne. And that was the other thing that Augustine was always sort of trying to address, not only in his Just War but in his other writings, was the idea that no, in fact, the Christians have saved the empire. Rome was an evil empire, and I think it's in the City of God where he writes about this, but it might not be. Rome was heading towards spiritual destruction until the Christians came along, and because the Christians Christianized the empire, this legitimizes soldiering, because Rome brings order through its connection with Christ and God. So yes, that's good, and I kind of skipped ahead, which is fine. Yeah, this idea that basically, this idea that Roman peace and Christian peace now support each other by virtue of the Christianizing Rome. So that's Constantine the Great. So you've got a major historical change within the Roman Empire, and then you have almost immediately on the scene, 1 year after Constantine dies, Ambrose is born. Okay, Ambrose and Augustine had a very close relationship. Does anybody know what that relationship was, or a little bit about it?
Augustine hearing Ambrose preach that began his conversion
That's right.
early on.
That's right. Augustine ended up in Ambrose's town, and Ambrose and Augustine's mother, who you may know is a wonderful Christian lady who prayed and wept years for her son and fully believed that he would one day become a Christian, which he did, and she lived to see it, Monica. Monica and Ambrose, I hate to use the word schemed, because that's not a very, it doesn't have positive connotations, but they discussed together, as in, often I think as we see in today's society, mom and bishop are talking about the son, and Ambrose was very encouraging to her and said, he's going to come on. Any woman who prays and weeps as much as you do for your son, I can assure you that he will be a Christian someday. That's actually what he said. And he did. He really made his first positive step towards Christ from hearing Ambrose preach, and Ambrose actually baptized him. And another cool story that has nothing to do with Just War, the Te Deum, which we sing every Sunday as well, is said, I don't know if this is true, to have been written by Ambrose for the occasion of Augustine's baptism, which is really cool. Yeah.
Anybody research that, or did you try?
I didn't do much research into it, but there's Google and Wikipedia, which are the two most reliable sources I found.
Wikipedia is
Absolutely. If Wikipedia-
Anybody can write anything they want on
Well,
Wikipedia
but
and change
there's
history.
a little bit of it. Well, you know, that's an old wives' tale. Actually, that's true. Anyway, I did not do a lot of research into that, but that's what it said. So obviously Ambrose and Augustine had a close relationship. Ambrose was the first to really consider, in a Christian empire, Cicero's theory of just war, which we discussed last week, in the context of Christianity. Okay, he did not come out with any kind of a systematic treatise, pamphlet, writing on the just war theory, but what he did talk about was a couple of things here that we see in our just war criteria today. You know, in the past, the problem that the early church fathers had with fighting was what? Does anybody remember? We barely hit on it, I know. Besides the Roman Empire being evil, what was another theological problem that they had with Christians fighting?